Three average young women.
She's a fun person.
A very intelligent girl.
We grew up with them. Those were our friends.
Who committed three shocking crimes.
We gotta get out of the house.
She said, I would like a picture of her dead.
I just kept hearing her say, oh, this bitch stabbed me.
All with one thing in common.
She immediately got on Facebook and was bashing me.
Spreading gossip.
In a special episode, Snap looks at how social media drove three different women to dangerous extremes.
That sense of anger and her frustration.
So emotionally overwrought that she wasn't thinking clearly.
My sister said, I'll have the last laugh.
The jealousy caused her to snap.
Our first story takes us to Des Moines, Iowa, a Midwestern city of 200,000 that's the epitome of middle America.
It's a very good place to live and a very good place to raise your family.
But even in the heartland, the 21st century is changing things. And 31-year-old Nikki Chambers would discover just how much early on the morning of October 27th, 2011.
About 1 a.m., there was like loud popping noises. And I had had problems with someone lighting fireworks. And so I went to the back door to see if I could see anyone, and I looked out.
What she saw horrified her.
911. My garage is completely on fire.
You couldn't even really see the garage. It was just all flames.
All right, ma'am, stand in line. Let me get the fire department.
It's horrible. Do we need to get out of the house?
The garage was detached, but not by much.
Our room was the furthest away, and my daughter's would have been the closest.
So close, in fact, that there was only one thing for Nikki, her husband, and her daughter to do.
Ma'am.
We gotta get out of the house.
Nikki woke her husband and then dashed into the bedroom where her 5-year-old daughter slept, desperate to save her family before the fire could jump the narrow gap between their home and the garage.
2 windows broke out from the heat.
Then Nikki dashed to safety.
I was just trying to get out, ran to the street, and waited on the other side of the street until the fire trucks arrived.
And by the time the firefighters did arrive,
The garage is fairly engulfed in flames.
All the siding on 2 sides of the house was completely melted.
luckily, the firefighters did manage to contain the blaze before it could spread to the house. But the garage and the 2 cars inside it were completely destroyed.
The roof structure of the garage had pretty much collapsed into the interior.
Based on the damage, the fire had started in Nikki's Toyota.
The most damage was where that car was parked.
And once the investigators arrived on the scene, they immediately noticed something suspicious about the car.
The door was ajar, was partly open, and I thought that was strange.
The fire would not have caused the door to open.
But the open door could explain how the fire started.
The person who started the fire had opened the door and put something in my car.
And it was fairly obvious to us that this was an intentionally set fire.
But who and why? Hoping for some answers, the investigators turned to Nikki. And according to the terrified young mother, there was only one person who could have set the fire.
I told them it's Jennifer Harris.
But it was how she knew that was the really astonishing part. According to Nikki, the fire that almost destroyed her home had first flared up on social media. Born in 1981, Jennifer Harris had known Nikki Chambers since they were both in their early 20s.
They had met in Mitchellville, Iowa. They worked at a local convenience store there.
She was a fun person. She was nice. She was energetic, and we just had fun working together.
But Jennifer also had a wild streak.
She was really into drinking and going out to the bars and partying.
She had a baby at 20, a son, but the boy's father didn't stick around.
The father has never wanted anything to do with him.
Nikki had better luck, though. And when she got married in 2005, Jennifer was there for her best friend.
She was my maid of honor.
Although both women ended up in Des Moines, they drifted apart in their late 20s.
I had my daughter and was raising her, and she was raising her son, so we didn't really see each other very often. Probably a few times a year, and then talk on the phone or text each other on the phone.
Not that they didn't want to see one another. It's just that Jennifer was extremely busy. The single mom held down a full-time job as a teacher's aide and worked part-time as a hairstylist.
Anything she could do to put some food on the table, just trying to keep things going.
Jennifer and Nikki never entirely lost touch with one another, though. And in January of 2010, Jennifer came up with a way for the two friends to stay connected.
Jennifer asked Nikki to set up a Facebook account for her.
Nikki readily agreed. The social media platform appeared to be a perfect fit for two busy moms.
The positive aspects of social media are that we are able to connect with people and feel a sense of belonging.
However, once Nikki became Facebook friends with Jennifer, she realized that she and her old friend no longer had all that much in common. While Nikki, then 29, had been settling into marriage, 28-year-old Jennifer had gone through a whole series of relationships, but none of them lasted.
She dated a number of guys, but finding decent guys, personally, I don't think there's a whole lot of them out there.
Maybe the problem was where she met them. Because as the posts on her wall revealed, Jennifer still spent a surprising amount of time in bars. So much so that Nikki started worrying about her old friend.
I know she was drinking a lot.
And by 2011, Nikki wasn't the only one worried about Jennifer either. Her father could also sense his daughter's growing frustration with the way her life was going.
I would go in the house, and I could just feel this sense in the air that, like, this is like a pressure cooker, and the lid's going to pop off at one of these days.
And it was Facebook that turned up the heat. It started at the end of September when Jennifer sent Nikki a message asking for more Facebook help.
It was like, hey, can you set up a birthday party event for me on Facebook?
Jennifer would be turning 30 on October 17th, and she wanted to celebrate in a big way.
She called it her Dirty 30.
Nikki agreed to help plan the party, although considering the sort of hard drinking event Jennifer had in mind, the young mother did it reluctantly.
Nikki was very lukewarm to the notion of being involved with that. She did it anyway, trying to be a friend.
The party was set for October 15th, and as the date approached, Nikki noticed that Jennifer was becoming anxious.
She was really concerned about having a birthday party and making sure people would be there and having fun.
Unfortunately for Jennifer, her friends appeared far less concerned if the RSVPs for the party were any indication.
There had been a lot of no's clicked.
Nikki could tell her friend was disappointed, although Jennifer did try and put a brave face on things when she spoke to Nikki on the phone a few nights before the 15th.
She had said, well, if nobody shows up to my party, we'll go out and go downtown drinking.
But then Nikki declined.
I had said, you know, you can't leave your 9-year-old home alone to go out drinking.
And that made Jennifer mad.
She told me that I was acting like her mother.
Jennifer hung up on Nikki, but that wasn't the end of the argument.
She immediately got on Facebook and was bashing me, saying, well, what kind of friend plans your birthday party and then says they're not going to show up?
In fact, a few of Jennifer's comments pinned the party's failure squarely on Nikki.
She blamed Nikki for this, for not trying hard enough.
And when Nikki logged on a few hours later, she was shocked.
I had got on the computer and saw that other people were starting to say stuff. They were just assuming that what she was saying was true and just, you know, leaving their own comments.
Naturally, Nikki left a few comments of her own, which drew a quick and irate response from Jennifer.
Things are starting to get said back and forth, you know, between each other.
And with each post, the two women became angrier and angrier until at last, Jennifer crossed the line and said something in front of all their friends that Nikki found unforgivable.
that my husband married me because I was pregnant.
And with that, their decade-long friendship was over, at least as far as Facebook went.
Nikki decides, I'm just going to unfriend Jennifer.
It's the ultimate form of friendship betrayal. I'm not going to be friends with you anymore, and everybody is going to know it.
But was that the end of the feud between the two former friends? Because despite their very public break on Facebook, Jennifer sent Nikki one last message on October 26th, a text to her cell phone.
It was something along the lines of, if you want to start something, game on.
By a little after 1 o'clock in the morning on October 27, 2011, firefighters in Des Moines, Iowa managed to put out the blaze that had gutted Nikki Chambers' garage.
The garage was a total loss, along with our 2 cars that were in it and all the contents.
Luckily, no one had been hurt.
They were awakened by noise behind the house, likely from something in one of the vehicles exploding, and exited their house.
But when the firefighters surveyed the wreckage, they suspected that the fire had been deliberately set.
It was certainly suspicious in nature, and so they had their arson investigators come out and do the investigation.
And according to what Nikki told the investigators, she was convinced her longtime friend Jennifer Harris had done it.
I knew right away it was her. I kept saying, I know this is Jen. Jen did this.
Nikki's reasoning may have sounded far-fetched to most people.
They were having a social media feud, a Facebook feud.
But it didn't sound that way to the fire investigators. They knew from experience that arsons often stemmed from a desire for revenge.
When people are frustrated, angry, instead of taking physical violence, the fire seems to be kind of a safer way for them to cause harm to somebody.
So once the fire investigators finished their preliminary investigation, a Des Moines police detective called Jennifer Harris on October 28th and recorded their conversation.
Do you know an individual by the name of Nikki Rasmussen?
Yes, she used to be my friend.
Emphasis on used to be.
Jennifer admitted to me that she was upset with Nikki.
Jennifer also admitted that the 2 former friends were feuding, but she blamed everything on Nikki.
She wrote all this down, I stepped on the wall. And I got on the other morning and I found out that she changed all these other passwords.
Okay.
So we're not talking.
And when the investigator asked Jennifer about the fire, she basically said, what fire?
I didn't even know that there was fire at her house.
I asked her point blank, did you set the garage on fire? No, she didn't have anything to do with it.
In fact, Jennifer told the investigators she couldn't have set the fire.
She denied everything and that she was not even in Des Moines, that she was at her parents' house in Mitchellville.
It would verify that you stayed that evening there, Wednesday evening, Thursday morning.
Yep.
Contacted that same day, Jennifer's father backed his daughter up.
I feel really confident that my daughter would not have had anything to do with setting the fire.
Then the investigators asked Jennifer's dad to confirm her alibi.
He proceeded to tell me that Jennifer had been staying at their house.
But according to Jennifer's father, she hadn't stayed the night on October 26th, the night of the fire.
Jen did not stay at your house. No, she stayed at her own house.
Jennifer's father didn't stop at poking a huge hole in her alibi, though. He also told the investigator that his daughter had begged him to lie to the police.
She called and wanted me to collaborate that she was at my house that night. Well, she wasn't. And I told her I can't lie for him.
But while he admitted that he was aware of the feud between his daughter and Nikki, he still insisted that Jennifer was innocent.
I've been telling her, look, drop it, drop the feud, close your Facebook account. All I can tell you is what I know and feel. And I really would be shocked if Jennifer actually did that.
Jennifer's father might have been shocked, but not her sister-in-law. When the investigators spoke to her 3 days later, she told them about a conversation she'd had with Jennifer after the fire.
She said she might have possibly have done that.
Jennifer had told her that she had lit a roll of toilet paper on fire and threw it in the garage.
And why had she done it? According to her sister-in-law, Jennifer's disappointment over the failed party and the anger that had first flared on Facebook had combined with her drinking to produce an incendiary result.
She was drunk and she was mad.
Between her father denying her alibi and the alleged confession to her sister-in-law, the investigators had a solid case against Jennifer.
I had enough information to file an arson charge on Jennifer.
And since the fire could have spread to Nikki's house and posed a threat to human life, she was charged with first-degree arson.
It's a mandatory 25-year sentence.
At her father's urging, Jennifer turned herself in on November 1st.
I drove her to the police station to turn herself in. I can imagine how hard it was for her having to go there.
And once booked into jail on the arson charge, she stayed there, unable to make bail.
She could not afford it. It was $100,000.
But would she end up serving the full 25 years? Since no one was injured, the prosecutors offered Jennifer the chance to plead guilty to second-degree arson.
An arson second degree is an intentionally set fire to a structure causing more than $500 damage.
And in exchange for the plea?
We agreed to a suspended sentence, 2 years probation, making full restitution, a $1,000 fine.
However, there was one more condition, one aimed at ensuring that Jennifer never let anger and alcohol cloud her judgment again.
There was a requirement of a substance abuse evaluation and any treatment.
With 25 years in prison as the alternative, Jennifer quickly took the deal. And on May 10th, 2012, she pled guilty in exchange for a 10-year suspended sentence, agreed to pay almost $6,000 in restitution, and was released from the Polk County Jail.
She spent 6 months in jail, November to May.
Since then, she has been stone dry sober, no drugs, no alcohol, going out to the bars, running around. I mean, she didn't even think about that. That's a past life. That doesn't happen anymore.
Jennifer had been lucky. Instead of destroying her life, her misuse of social media had ultimately allowed her to turn things around. But would another young woman be as fortunate when a chance discovery on social media sent her shopping for revenge? Mesa, Arizona, September 12, 2006. It was Tuesday afternoon when 22-year-old Heather Kane pulled into a parking lot in this booming town of 400,000 just outside Phoenix.
People come here for the schools. People come here for the good housing and job opportunities.
But on that particular day, Heather was looking for something else. In the parking lot, she pulled up next to a pickup truck and spoke to the two men inside about a problem she had.
She identifies the MySpace page of her ex-boyfriend, identifies the picture of the person that she's concerned about.
The picture in question was of her ex-boyfriend, Nathan, and the new girl he was seeing, the girl Heather wanted killed.
They asked Heather if she wanted Nathan and his new girlfriend killed, and Heather said no, she just wants the girlfriend killed.
A girlfriend she might have never known about, if not for social media. Heather first started dating Nathan Smith 5 months earlier in April of 2006.
Nathan was her first serious romantic relationship. She had very, very strong feelings for him.
Nathan needed someone in his life, too. The 24-year-old had recently gotten out of prison.
She put a roof over his head. She supported him. She did a lot of things for Nathan to help him get on his feet after he got out of prison.
But then, on September 8th, Nathan told Heather he was going out to look for a job and disappeared.
Nathan just didn't come home. No explanation, no phone call. She didn't know if he'd been arrested. She didn't know if he'd been in an accident.
But after a few anxious days, her fear turned to anger when she checked Nathan's MySpace page.
Heather discovers that, in fact, he's having a relationship with someone else.
And if pictures of Nathan with another woman weren't humiliating enough, there were also pictures of his new girlfriend posing for the camera.
Some were provocative, were inappropriate.
Naturally, Heather was furious.
But it wasn't only that he broke her heart, but there was also a betrayal there in terms of everything that she'd done for him. And then all of a sudden, here he's with another woman.
The jealousy boiled up in Heather.
And just like Jennifer Harris, the jealousy and anger that social media stirred up made Heather do something rash.
She was so emotionally overwrought, and she felt so betrayed that she wasn't thinking clearly.
On September 12, 2006, 22-year-old Heather Kane sat in a parking lot in Mesa, Arizona, talking with two men she believed to be hitmen. Heather's ex-boyfriend, 24-year-old Nathan Smith, had walked out on her just 4 days earlier, and soon after started posting pictures of his new girlfriend on his MySpace page.
Being able to see her pictures, it kind of drove her into a frenzy.
It wasn't only that he broke her heart, but there was also a betrayal there in terms of everything that she'd done for him, all the sacrifices she'd made for him.
And considering all that, seeing Nathan with another woman was just too much.
The jealousy caused her to snap.
She was trying to hire someone to kill the new girlfriend.
Heather had approached one of her neighbors, asking for his help in setting up the hit. And he'd put her in touch with two men who said they could do the job.
They set up a meeting with Heather in the parking lot of a local grocery store here in Mesa.
But what Heather didn't know was that the two hitmen were actually undercover cops. Heather's neighbor had turned her in.
The police started investigating and they set up a sting.
Sitting in the truck with the two undercover officers, Heather handed over pictures of the target, Nathan's new girlfriend.
In this case, photos that were taken from her MySpace account.
Then, once her target was identified, she haggled over the price.
The hitman originally quoted her $3,000, and she bargained it down to $1,000. This was murder for hire at a discount rate.
Even so, she only handed over $400 for the hit.
She set up a payment plan.
And she told the hitmen they would get the rest when the job was done, but only if they provided her with proof.
She said, I would like a picture of her dead.
That's what Heather wanted. But as things turned out, it was Heather who ended up in front of a camera for her mugshot.
She was driving away from the grocery store and was pulled over immediately and arrested.
The charge in this particular case is conspiracy to commit murder.
Heather was in shock. She had been living with Nathan, been going to school, been working, been trying to further her life. 7 days later, her life has crumbled.
Not only had her life crumbled, she could end up spending the rest of it in prison.
Conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, which in Arizona carries a sentence of life with the possibility of parole after 25 years.
So when the prosecution offered Heather a reduced sentence in return for a guilty plea, she quickly took the deal.
Heather Kane pled guilty to attempted murder and received a sentence of 13 years in prison.
Heather is now in a jail cell thinking about the biggest mistake of her life and what it cost her.
It was a mistake that many young women had made before her.
It's the oldest story in the book. A woman becomes consumed with jealousy over the thought of a man being with another woman.
But in this case, the familiar story had started with a new 21st century twist.
Heather's case probably wouldn't have happened but for MySpace.
Not only was social media how Heather discovered Nathan's two-timing, posting provocative pictures of his new girlfriend to his MySpace page made his betrayal public.
We do not want to be humiliated publicly, and this is the first time in history, really, where we can be humiliated in front of thousands of people.
Although while Heather is in prison, she's also lucky, as is the woman who took her place. The outcome for each of them could have been far worse.
If the neighbor had not called police, this woman would have ended up dead.
Heather's social media-fueled quest for revenge had stopped short of actually taking a life. But in 2011, 2 young women in New York wouldn't be nearly so fortunate, because in their case, a bitter feud that began on Facebook would end in murder. Brooklyn, New York, February 28, 2011. It was about 10:30 p.m. when the NYPD received an urgent 911 call from a public housing project called the Cypress Hills Houses.
Life in the Cypress Hills houses is tough. A lot of drugs in the neighborhood. You have a lot of gang violence.
But this report, a stabbing in the apartment where 18-year-old Kayla Henriquez lived with her family, was different. First off, the victim was a young woman.
You could hear like she's just on the floor saying, "Oh God."
But even more unusual, the violence wasn't drug or gang related. Instead, the whole thing had started on social media. Born in 1992, growing up in Cypress Hills meant that Kayla had started out with the odds against her.
When you grow up in that neighborhood, the chances of you living a successful life are pretty slim.
And that wasn't the only disadvantage she faced.
Kayla's mother passed away when Kayla was a very young child.
She was living with her grandmother. Her dad wasn't really there.
However, there was at least one person who was always there for Kayla, her childhood friend, Kamisha Richards. Kamisha was in elementary school when her family moved into Kayla's apartment complex.
We grew up with them. Those were our friends as well.
But despite the fact that Kamisha was 4 years older than Kayla, their bond was special.
She took Kayla Henriquez under her wing. She treated her like a kid sister.
And for Kayla, Kamisha was the kind of big sister any little girl would want.
She was just that person that you could depend on, a person that you could confide in, and you could just talk to for hours.
Kamisha was more than just a friend and confidant, though. She was also an excellent example for the younger girl to follow.
She was all about her books. If I say, Kamisha, let's go outside, let's go play. No, I'm gonna do my homework now.
She was very much into school. She loved going to school.
All that hard work eventually paid off, too. Kamisha graduated from a magnet high school and then went on to study criminal justice in college.
She wanted to be a lawyer. She was a very opinionated person. She would debate you on anything.
She was the type to always speak her mind.
She could be a bit bossy, too, especially when it came to Kayla and her younger siblings.
She will always tell us, go to school, graduate, go to college.
But college wasn't enough for Kamisha. By 2011, the 22-year-old was working 2 jobs and waiting to hear if she'd gotten into law school.
She had an internship at a law firm, so she was trying to build a life for herself.
She's kind of a poster child for hope.
She was just a winner in everything that she did. She was destined to be someone.
Kayla, on the other hand, had become a statistic, one all too common among the residents of Cypress Hills houses, a teenaged single mom. Kayla was only 17 when she got pregnant.
Kamisha would talk to her, try to get her to go back to school, stay in school, do the right thing.
But even if Kamisha was disappointed in Kayla, she did stick by her.
She helped Kayla a lot, took her to her first doctor's appointment. She threw her son's baby shower.
And once the little boy was born in April of 2010, Kamisha was always there, whether Kayla needed someone to watch the baby or simply a little money to get by.
She wanted to make sure that the little boy was being taken care of.
Anytime you needed anything, she will help you out the best way she can.
The relationship between Kamisha and Kayla was more than just best friends.
She loved Kayla. Like that was her own blood sister.
But in February of 2011, a fight that started on Facebook would not only put their sisterhood to the test, it would leave one of them with blood on her hands. At 10:30 on Monday night, February 28, 2011, police responded to a 911 call from Brooklyn's Cypress Hills housing project. A young woman had just been stabbed.
A family member at the scene called 911.
The victim was 22-year-old Kamisha Richards.
Kayla was identified as being the person who stabbed Kamisha.
Kayla wasn't there, and none of the people in the apartment had actually seen the stabbing. But they had witnessed the fight that preceded it, an argument over money. According to the friends and family at the scene, it had all started a few days earlier when Kayla borrowed $20 from Kamisha.
Kayla needed milk or something for her baby.
At least, that's what Kayla had told Kamisha. But soon after she loaned her friend the money, Kamisha had started having doubts.
Kamisha didn't think that Kayla actually bought the milk with the $20. She thought that Kayla went and spent the money on her friends.
Must have been like that.
And when she dropped by Kayla's apartment that evening, Kamisha had demanded her $20 back.
She was tired of lending and giving and being a support system and not getting that respect back.
However, according to her friends, Kayla was tired too. Tired of being compared to Kamisha.
Everyone's talking about Kamisha and how great Kamisha's doing and what a role model Kamisha is. And I think for Kayla, it was just too much.
Kayla's friend said she had gotten angry with Kamisha, refusing to pay her back.
Kayla kept telling her she didn't have the money.
But Kamisha had persisted, and before long, things had turned angry, even threatening.
She was angry. Like they said, Kayla was just wild and she just didn't want to stop.
So wild, in fact, that Kayla's friends had to restrain her.
You're dealing with people that live in a neighborhood where there's a lot of violence. They see a lot of fights.
While Kayla's friends tried to calm her down, Kamisha had retreated to a bedroom. And once the younger girl's anger appeared to subside, she'd gone into the bedroom, supposedly to talk to Kamisha. But according to Kayla's friends, once the two women were alone in the room, voices and tempers had again started to rise.
This time, before they can go into the room and separate the pair, Kayla comes out.
Kayla's friends asked what happened, but said that she had simply walked out of the apartment. Instead, it was Kamisha who provided the answer when she staggered out of the bedroom moments later.
Kamisha fell to the floor, and she just kept saying, "She stabbed me. She stabbed me."
Once in the chest, but it was enough.
She's stabbed in the heart.
The EMTs rushed her to the hospital.
She was very calm, they said. She was asking, could somebody call her mother?
But by the time the ambulance arrived,
it was too late.
She was pronounced dead.
By then, Kayla was in custody. The police had tracked her down soon after they arrived at the scene.
They found a blood trail that led to another apartment where Kayla had fled. They cuff her, they bring her to the 7-5 precinct station house and question her.
Once in the interrogation room, Kayla appeared surprisingly calm at first.
I don't think at the time she realized what she had done.
But then, once the investigators explained that Kamisha was dead.
She was upset, but she was also trying to justify why she stabbed Kamisha, trying to say that it was Kamisha's fault.
So she mouthing off or whatever. She wants to fight now.
Specifically, Kayla said that it was Kamisha who had first escalated things by taking their personal dispute public by posting it to Facebook.
Kayla said that Kamisha was talking very bad about her on Facebook and it was upsetting her.
You don't have to post stuff on Facebook, like trying to make me feel like I'm poor something over $20. Like, don't throw me out there.
Of course, Kayla had responded with a few angry posts of her own.
They were making fun of each other. They were talking down to each other.
This private argument for $20 became just this bitter back and forth between these two women, this real angry argument in front of everybody.
And by Sunday night, February 27th, it appeared that Kayla was ready to take things face to face. Kamisha didn't appear to take the bait, though. Instead, she responded with ridicule.
Right now on Facebook, my sister said, "I'll have the last laugh," or something like that. Kayla was like, "We'll see."
It was tough for the investigators to say whether Kayla's response was meant as a threat.
It is really challenging to identify a post that could lead to actual physical violence.
But Kayla said that things had quickly escalated once Kamisha dropped by her apartment later that night.
This is their first time seeing each other since the whole Facebook spat.
Although according to Kayla, the feud was far from forgotten.
She's like, "Do you have my $20?
And when Kayla said no,
Kamisha went to the kitchen of the apartment and she went into the refrigerator and dumped out some formula that was for Kayla's infant baby.
Poured half of it on the floor.
Then she tried to get in the last word.
Kamisha came back into the apartment living room and told Kayla, "Now we're even."
Somebody told me we're even now, and that means you done something to me. So I'm going around, I'm looking to see what's missing. I goes in the kitchen, I'm searching around. I just open the freezer. My baby's milk is gone.
The argument turned into a murder over literally spilled milk.
Although Kayla claimed it wasn't murder. Instead, Kayla said she had only picked up the knife because Kamisha was armed.
Kamisha grabs scissors, according to Kayla, and she grabs a kitchen knife.
We was in each other's face or whatever, but I wasn't gonna swing. She swung at me, and then I swung back at her.
That's the story that she was telling. And she was trying just to defend herself.
I consider her as an older sister to me. I would never try to hurt Kamisha.
In fact, Kayla said that when she turned and stormed angrily out of the apartment, she didn't really think she had hurt Kamisha.
I just kept hearing her say, "Oh, this bitch stabbed me, da-da-da." But when I looked at her, I didn't see no blood.
Kayla claimed not to have seen any blood and may have argued that she'd acted in self-defense. But the police didn't see it that way. Once her interview was over, they placed Kayla under arrest for murder.
She was charged with murder in the second degree, which basically means with the intention of killing another human being.
On July 31st, 2013, 20-year-old Kayla Henriquez was in a New York City courtroom facing murder charges in the death of her lifelong friend.
Kayla tells investigators that she killed Kamisha in self-defense and that it was actually Kamisha who attacked her in the bedroom, wielding a pair of scissors.
Kayla may have claimed self-defense, but that hadn't stopped the New York authorities from charging her with second-degree murder.
Punishment that she was facing for murder 2 was 25 to life, which means that she could have spent the rest of her life behind bars.
If she stood trial, that is. Kayla was in court to enter a guilty plea.
She accepted a plea deal where she pleaded guilty to manslaughter and was sentenced to 15 years.
Kamisha's family had agreed to the plea deal.
I told the judge there's a special place in hell for her for what she did to Kamisha.
But when the judge offered Kayla a chance to speak before he announced her sentence,
she looked straight at him, not a word.
The young woman who'd said so much on social media was suddenly silent.
She didn't have anything to say.
She never said, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to do it. Nothing.
Today, social media sites like Facebook are more popular than ever.
The biggest increase in users is females between the age of 25 and 40.
But while they can be a great way to stay connected with friends and family, for some users, social media can become a way to belittle, to embarrass, or bully.
They can use it for spreading gossip or, whatever their agenda is.
And all it takes is one click to say something in public that can never be taken back.
You think, oh, I'm going to post that, and boom, it's out there.
My advice is anytime you're feeling that sense of anger or frustration, that is when you step away and you shut the computer.
It is the evening of December 12th, 1985, in the province of Messina, Sicily. The air is cold, the kind of cold that settles into your clothes and stays there, heavy and quiet. In a small industrial town not far from Villa Francavilla, a 17-year-old girl finishes her shift at a local laundry shop. Her name is Graziella Campagna. She does not know it yet, but this will be the last time she walks out of that building alive. There is nothing unusual about the moment itself. No warning signs, no dramatic confrontation. Just the ordinary end of a working day for a girl who has spent her short life trying to help her family survive. She steps outside and begins walking toward the bus stop, preparing to return home to Saponara, the town where she was born, where her family is waiting. The streets are not chaotic. Nothing suggests danger. And yet, within minutes, Graziella Campagna will disappear into one of the darkest cases connected to organized crime in modern Italy. What makes this case so disturbing is not just what happened to her, but why it happened. Graziella was not involved in crime. She was not part of any investigation. She was not a target in the traditional sense. She was a working-class teenager employed as a laundry assistant, doing repetitive, physically demanding work for very little pay, like thousands of others in her region. She lived with her family, one of 8 children, in a household shaped by poverty, but also by routine and survival. She had already left school early, not out of rebellion, but necessity. Her life was narrow in opportunity, but stable in intention, work, help her family, and try to build something better in the future. That future never came, because somewhere else in that same town, 2 men were living under false identities. They presented themselves as respectable professionals. One was known locally as Ingegnere Canata, an engineer. Another as Giamitra Lombardo, a land surveyor. To anyone observing them casually, they appeared unremarkable, even ordinary. They integrated into the environment, using these identities to move through daily life without suspicion. But behind those names were not professionals at all. They were fugitives connected to Cosa Nostra, the Sicilian mafia. Ingegnere Canata was in reality Gerlando Alberti Jr., a man already sought by law enforcement. His associate, Giovanni Sutera, operated alongside him. Together, they lived in concealment, protected by layers of silence and deception that allowed them to remain hidden in plain sight within a community that had no clear reason to question them. The tragedy of this case begins not with violence, but with something far more ordinary: laundry. Graziella worked in a small laundry business in Villa Francavilla. Her job was simple but repetitive. She received clothing, sorted it, cleaned it, and prepared it for return. Like many people in her position, she developed habits to make the work more efficient. One of those habits was checking pockets before washing or ironing garments. It was routine, not suspicion. A standard part of her work meant to avoid damaging items or missing important contents. On one particular day, Graziella received clothing belonging to one of the two men living under false identities. Inside one of the garments, she found something she was not supposed to see: a small notebook or set of documents hidden inside the pocket. At first glance, it may have seemed insignificant, but as she looked closer, the contents revealed something deeply unsettling: names, numbers, and connections that suggested a network of people operating far beyond ordinary business or professional life. She did not know everything those pages represented, but she understood enough to recognize that what she was holding was not normal, and more importantly, that it connected directly to the man she knew as Engineer Kanata. In that moment, without intention or awareness, Graziella Campagna crossed into a space she was never meant to enter. She had seen something that placed her, unknowingly, at the edge of a hidden world governed by secrecy, power, and violence. She did not report it. There is no record of her attempting to expose anything. But knowledge itself, in this context, was enough. Because in the world of Cosa Nostra, there is no distinction between someone who knows too much and someone who acts on that knowledge. Both are treated the same way. And once the men behind those false identities realized that she might have seen something, the situation changed. Quietly, decisively, and without public awareness, a decision was made. Graziella Campagna became a problem that needed to be removed, not because she sought danger, but because she happened to be in its path. What followed would not be immediate public understanding. In fact, at first, nothing about her disappearance would be treated as what it truly was. A crime shaped by organized power tends to disguise itself in confusion, delay, and misdirection. And in the hours after she left her workplace on December 12, 1985, that pattern had already begun. She walked her to bus stop. She never arrived home. And for a short period of time, her absence would be treated not as a murder, but as something far less clear. But clarity, in this case, would come at a devastating cost. Because by the time the truth emerged, Graziella Campagna would already be gone. It is important to understand that in the world Graziella Campagna was living in, nothing about her life suggested she was moving toward danger. There was no connection to crime, no involvement in investigations, no reason for her name to appear in police files or intelligence reports. She existed in a completely different reality, one defined by early mornings, long hours of physical labor, and the quiet responsibility of helping her family survive. Born on July 3, 1968 in Saponara, a small town in the province of Messina, she grew up in a household shaped by necessity rather than comfort. Her family was large, with 7 siblings, and like many families in southern Italy during that period, every member had to contribute in some way to daily survival. Education, for Graziella, was not a long-term journey, but a short path interrupted by economic pressure. She left school early, not because she lacked ability or ambition, but because work became more urgent than study. That decision led her into employment at a laundry business in Villafranca Terrena, a nearby town where she worked as a styratrice, an ironer, handling clothes brought in by local customers. The work was repetitive and physically demanding, requiring patience and endurance more than skill. It did not offer stability or upward mobility, but it provided something essential: income for her family. Those who knew her described her as quiet, responsible, and diligent. Someone who did not seek attention, but focused on completing her tasks properly. In the context of her community, she was invisible in the best possible way: ordinary, hardworking, and far removed from anything resembling criminal activity. Yet outside that ordinary rhythm of life, another reality existed in the same geographical space, one that would eventually intersect with hers in the most destructive way possible. Sicily in the mid-1980s was still deeply affected by the presence of Cosa Nostra. a criminal organization that operated not only through violence, but through concealment and integration. Its members often did not present themselves as criminals. Instead, they adopted professional identities, blending into civilian life with carefully constructed false roles. This was not uncommon in areas where organized crime had long-established influence. In the same region where Graziella worked, 2 men were living under such disguises. They were known locally as Ingegnera Canada and Geometra Lombardo, titles that suggested respectability and technical professions. They moved within the community without drawing obvious suspicion, presenting themselves as ordinary professionals. In reality, these identities were false. Ingegnere Canata was Gerlando Alberti GR, a man connected to the structures of Cosa Nostra and actively avoiding law enforcement attention. Alongside him was Giovanni Sutera, who operated in association with him. Their presence in the area was not accidental, but part of a pattern of concealment that allowed individuals linked to organized crime to live temporarily within civilian environments while evading capture. For Graziella, these men were simply customers. They brought clothing to the laundry like anyone else. There was no reason for her to question their identities beyond what they presented. The interaction between them and her was routine and transactional, centered around the basic service she provided. It is within this ordinary framework that the critical event of the case occurred. Graziella's job required her to handle clothing items carefully. As part of her routine work, she would check garments before cleaning them, ensuring nothing was damaged or lost in the process. This included inspecting pockets, a standard procedure in laundry work to avoid mistakes or accidents. It was during one of these routine inspections that she discovered something inside a garment. Biloncino tu Ingegnere Canata. The object was a small notebook or collection of documents. At first, it would not have appeared extraordinary in a general sense. Many people carry notes or personal records in their clothing. But as she examined it more closely, she found contents that did not match the profile of a normal customer. There were names, numbers, and references that suggested connections between multiple individuals. It was not simply personal information. It appeared to indicate a network of contacts. Graziella did not fully understand what she was looking at, and there is no evidence that she interpreted it as part of a criminal structure. However, she did recognize that it was unusual and that it was linked to the man she knew as Canada. This recognition, even if incomplete, was enough to create risk. Because in the world of Cosa Nostra, uncertainty is not tolerated when it comes to potential exposure. The discovery itself did not involve any deliberate act of investigation. It was accidental, the result of routine work carried out countless times before. But the consequence of that accident extended far beyond the environment of the laundry shop. Once the existence of that document was understood by the individuals involved, Graziella Campagna was no longer simply a worker in a small town. She became, unknowingly, a liability. Not because she sought to expose anything, and not because she communicated what she had seen, but because she had seen it all. From that point forward, her presence represented a potential threat to secrecy. In the logic of organized crime, especially within the structures of Cosa Nostra, such risks are often dealt with in the most irreversible way possible. The transition from ordinary life to danger did not announce itself to Graziella. There was no confrontation, no explanation, no visible escalation that would have signaled what was coming. She continued her work, unaware that a decision had already been made outside her awareness. In a world she did not belong to and never chose to enter. The intersection between these two realities, the life of a 17-year-old laundry worker and the hidden existence of fugitives protected by criminal networks, was now complete. And from that point onward, the timeline of her life would move toward a moment that would permanently end it. It is the afternoon of December 12, 1985, in the province of Messina. The kind of winter light that falls over Sicily at this time of year is pale and indifferent, as if it has no intention of warming anything it touches. In Villafranca Terrena, life continues in its ordinary rhythm. Small businesses operating, people finishing shifts, buses running their usual routes. Among them is a 17-year-old girl named Graziella Campagna, who ends her workday at a local laundry shop where she has been employed as a styratress, an Irona responsible for handling and finishing clothing brought in by customers. Her work is physical and repetitive, but it is honest, and it allows her to contribute to a family that depends on every wage she can bring home. She is not someone who moves through the world with influence or visibility. She is, in every sense, a young working-class girl trying to maintain stability in a place where stability is often fragile. When her shift ends, she leaves the shop and begins the short journey toward the bus stop that will take her back to Saponara, her hometown. There is nothing about her movements that suggests danger. No urgency, no awareness of threat, no reason for suspicion. And yet, at the same time, elsewhere in the same region, decisions have already been made that will converge on her path in a matter of hours. Those decisions do not come from chance. They come from two men who have been living in the same geographic space under entirely different identities. In the community where Graziella works, they are known by respectable titles. One is referred to as Ingegnera Canata, an engineer. The other as Giamitra Lombardo, a land surveyor. These names allow them to function within society without drawing attention. They rent space within normal life, occupying roles that suggest professionalism and legitimacy. To anyone who interacts with them casually, there is no immediate reason to question who they are. But these identities are constructed. Behind them are Gerlando Alberti Jr. and Giovanni Sutera, individuals connected to the structures of Cosa Nostra, the Sicilian mafia. Alberti Jr., in particular, is a fugitive, someone actively avoiding law enforcement. Their presence in the area is not incidental. It is part of a broader pattern in which individuals linked to organized crime embed themselves within civilian environments, using false identities as a shield against detection. For Graziella, these men are simply customers. They bring clothing to the laundry shop like anyone else. The relationship is transactional and routine. There is no reason for her to question their names or backgrounds. The critical moment in this case does not begin with confrontation or violence. It begins with work. Graziella's job requires her to handle clothing carefully and methodically. Part of that process involves checking pockets before items are cleaned or ironed, a standard procedure designed to prevent damage or loss. It is a habit repeated countless times, part of the discipline of her role. On one particular occasion, while inspecting a garment belonging to Ingegnera Canata, she discovers something that interrupts the normal flow of her routine. Inside the pocket is a small notebook or set of documents. At first glance, it is not something that immediately signals danger. It could easily be mistaken for personal notes or harmless paperwork. But as she looks at it more closely, she notices details that do not fit the context of an ordinary customer. There are names, numbers, and references that suggest connections between multiple individuals. It is structured in a way that implies coordination, not casual record-keeping. Graziella does not possess the tools or experience to fully interpret what she is seeing. There is no evidence that she understands it as part of a criminal organization or a mafia network. What she does recognize is simpler and more immediate. This is unusual, and it belongs to the man known to her as Canata. That realization, even without deeper comprehension, is enough to alter the nature of her position in the eyes of those who are hiding behind these identities. Because in the logic of Cosa Nostra, uncertainty is not a safe condition. The possibility that someone outside the organization has seen something sensitive is treated as a threat regardless of intent. Graziella did not seek this knowledge. She did not investigate, and she did not act on it. It entered her life through the normal procedures of her work, without warning and without choice. But once it existed, it could not be undone. At some point after this discovery, the individuals involved become aware that the situation has changed. The details of how this awareness occurs are not part of the recorded facts. But the outcome is clear. Graziella Campagna is now perceived as a risk. Not because she has taken action against them, but because she has been exposed to something that should have remained hidden. In environments controlled by organized crime, that kind of exposure is often treated as irreversible. From that point forward, the trajectory of her life is no longer shaped only by her own world of work, family, and routine. It is now intersecting with another system, one governed by secrecy, enforcement, and silence. The two realities remain separate in appearance, but they are now linked by a single point of knowledge that Graziella never intended to possess. As she continues toward the bus stop after finishing her shift, she is still moving within her normal understanding of the world. She is not aware that she has crossed an invisible threshold, one that exists entirely outside her control. And in the hours that follow, that unseen threshold will define the final direction of her life. After Graziella Campagna disappeared on the evening of December 12, 1985, the immediate response did not reflect the gravity of what had actually occurred. In the early hours and days following her absence, there was no clear recognition that a violent crime had taken place. Instead, the case initially drifted into uncertainty, shaped by assumptions that often emerge when information is scarce and when the victim is a young person from a modest background with no known ties to criminal activity. At first, there was no focused understanding of her disappearance as an abduction or murder connected to organized crime. This absence of clarity would become one of the defining characteristics of the investigations. Early phase. Graziella had simply left her workplace, walked toward the bus stop, and never arrived home. From that limited set of facts, investigators and those around the case were forced to construct early interpretations without sufficient evidence. In this stage, the direction of inquiry did not immediately point toward Cosa Nostra or toward the two men living under false identities in the same region. Instead, the early narrative was shaped by ambiguity. One of the initial tendencies in the investigation was to consider explanations that are unfortunately common in missing persons cases involving young individuals. The possibility that she had left voluntarily, or that her disappearance was linked to personal or relational circumstances unrelated to external violence. These early hypotheses, while not supported by evidence of wrongdoing on her part, reflect a broader pattern in missing person investigations where limited information can lead to speculative interpretations before forensic or testimonial clarity is established. At the same time, the environment in which the investigation unfolded was not neutral. The presence of Cosa Nostra in the region meant that silence, fear, and indirect pressure were always factors that complicated the flow of information. Witnesses who might have seen relevant details were reluctant to speak openly. Information that could have clarified movements or identities was difficult to obtain. In cases where organized crime is potentially involved, even routine investigative steps can become obstructed by hesitation, omission, or deliberate concealment. In Graziella's case, this broader atmosphere contributed to delays in understanding what had truly happened in the hours after she left the laundry shop. The two men who were central to the events, Gerlando Alberti Jr. and Giovanni Sutera, continued to exist publicly under their false identities as Ingegnera Canada and Giamitro Lombardo. At this stage of the investigation, there was no immediate public linkage between these individuals and Graziella's disappearance. Their constructed identities still functioned as a protective layer. preventing early detection of their involvement. This separation between appearance and reality created a significant barrier for investigators attempting to reconstruct events. However, within Graziella's own family, particularly through her brother, who was a member of the Carabinieri, the investigative direction began to shift. Unlike the early external assumptions, the family's engagement introduced a more focused and persistent search for the truth. Her brother did not accept the ambiguity surrounding her disappearance as sufficient explanation. Instead, he began to pursue independent lines of inquiry, gathering information, speaking with contacts, and attempting to reconstruct the timeline of her final known movements. This personal involvement played a crucial role in shifting the case away from general speculation and toward targeted investigation. As details gradually emerged, the connection between Graziella's workplace and the individuals using false identities began to surface. The discovery of the notebook or documents she had found in the garment belonging to Kanata became a critical point of focus. While Graziella herself had not been able to interpret the full significance of what she saw, investigators and her family began to understand that the material she encountered was not ordinary. It contained structured information suggesting connections between multiple individuals, consistent with the type of records associated with organized networks. This realization reframed the entire case. What had initially been treated as an uncertain disappearance now began to align with the possibility that Graziella had encountered something she was not meant to see. As this line of reasoning developed, attention gradually moved toward the identities of Kanata and Lombardo. The more closely these figures were examined, the more inconsistencies emerged between their presented roles and the broader context of their presence in the region. However, despite this emerging awareness, the investigation did not immediately produce swift resolution. The involvement of mafia-linked individuals meant that access to reliable testimony and clear documentation was limited. The environment surrounding the case remained difficult, with delays and fragmentation of information slowing the process of reconstruction. Over time, however, the persistence of Graziella's family, particularly her brother's investigative efforts, helped consolidate the fragmented information into a more coherent narrative. The connection between the laundry shop, the discovered documents, and the individuals operating under false identities became increasingly difficult to ignore. What began as a disappearance case gradually evolved into a homicide investigation with potential links to organized crime. This transition was not immediate, but rather the result of accumulated evidence and persistent inquiry in the face of uncertainty. Even as this shift occurred, the structural challenges of the investigation remained significant. The influence of Cosa Nostra in the region meant that fear and silence continued to shape the flow of information. Witnesses were reluctant, leads were difficult to verify, and the passage of time further complicated the recovery of precise details. Despite these obstacles, the direction of the case had fundamentally changed. It was no longer a question of whether Graziella had simply disappeared. The emerging reality was that she had been targeted after inadvertently encountering sensitive information connected to individuals operating under false identities. This realization marked a turning point in the investigation, transforming it from a missing person case into a matter of violent crime with organized crime implications. The judicial phase of the case of Graziella Campagna did not unfold as a swift or straightforward path toward resolution. Instead, it stretched across many years, reflecting both the complexity of the crime itself and the broader difficulties of prosecuting cases connected to organized crime in Sicily. By the time the investigation had begun to take a more focused direction, the key figures under suspicion were already linked to false identities that had allowed them to move within society without immediate detection. These were Gerlando Alberti Jr., known locally as Ingegnera Canada, and Giovanni Sutera, known as Giamitra Lombardo. Their identification as central suspects marked a crucial turning point, but it did not immediately translate into legal closure. The process that followed would take more than 2 decades to reach final confirmation of guilt and sentencing, illustrating the slow and often obstructed nature of justice in cases involving Cosa Nostra. As the case moved into formal judicial proceedings, the central allegation became increasingly defined. Graziella Campagna had been killed not as part of a random act of violence, but because she had inadvertently come into possession of information that could compromise individuals connected to organized crime. The notebook or documents she had discovered in the garment belonging to Canada became a symbolic piece of evidence within the broader narrative of the case, representing the moment at which her life intersected fatally with a hidden criminal structure. The prosecution's position, as it developed over time, was that her knowledge, even if unintentional and never acted upon, was sufficient to trigger a lethal response within the logic of the organization she had unknowingly encountered. However, bringing the case to trial was not a simple matter of presenting a linear set of facts. The passage of time between the crime in 1985 and the eventual judicial outcomes meant that the investigation had to rely on accumulated evidence, reconstructed timelines, and testimonies that were often difficult to obtain or verify due to the influence of fear and silence surrounding Cosa Nostra. Witness reluctance and the long duration of the case created significant procedural challenges. In addition, the fact that the suspects had initially operated under false identities complicated the early stages of formal accusation, as it required investigators and prosecutors to first dismantle the protective layer of anonymity that had shielded them during the critical early period after the crime. Despite these obstacles, the judicial process gradually solidified its focus. Over time, the evidence gathered by investigators, combined with the persistence of Graziella's family, particularly her brother, who had played an active role in pursuing the truth, contributed to strengthening the case against the two men. The legal narrative increasingly aligned with the investigative findings. Graziella's death was the result of a targeted action intended to eliminate a perceived risk to individuals operating within the structures of organized crime. As proceedings advanced through different stages of the Italian judicial system, the case experienced delays, revisions, and periods of stagnation. These were not unusual in complex criminal trials of this nature, particularly those involving mafia-related activity, where procedural safeguards, evidentiary standards, and external pressures often extend the duration of litigation. Nevertheless, the direction of the case remained consistent over time. The central figures, Alberti Jr. and Sutera, remained at the core of the prosecution's argument, and the underlying facts of Graziella's disappearance and death continued to point toward their involvement. Eventually, after more than 20 years of legal and investigative work, the judicial process reached its conclusion. Both Gerlando Alberti Jr. and Giovanni Sutera were sentenced to life imprisonment for their roles in the killing of Graziella Campagna. This outcome represented the final formal recognition by the justice system of their responsibility in the crime. The long duration between the event and the final verdict underscored the challenges inherent in prosecuting cases tied to organized crime, where time, fear, and concealment often serve as additional barriers to accountability. The final confirmation of the sentence in the late stages of the judicial process marked the end of a prolonged legal journey that had begun with confusion and uncertainty in 1985. It established in legal terms the responsibility of the two men who had operated under false identities and who had been present in the same community as Graziella at the time of her death. With this ruling, the court formally recognized the nature of the crime as an act connected to the structures and logic of Cosa Nostra. rather than an isolated or accidental event. The sentencing did not alter the past, but it provided a definitive legal acknowledgement of what had occurred, closing one of the longest and most complex chapters in the pursuit of justice for Graziella Campagna. In the aftermath of the legal conclusion of Graziella Campagna's case, what remained was not only a completed judicial sentence, but also a deeper reflection on how such a crime could occur within an ordinary setting, almost invisibly until it was too late. The case, once reduced to legal documents, timelines, and court rulings, continued to carry a weight that extended far beyond the courtroom. At its core, this was not a story shaped by complexity of motive in the traditional sense of interpersonal conflict, but rather by the rigid internal logic of organized crime, where secrecy is protected at all costs and even unintended exposure can become a fatal risk. Graziella Campagna was not involved in any criminal activity, nor did she actively seek to uncover wrongdoing. Her connection to the events that led to her death was accidental, emerging from the routine nature of her work at a laundry shop in Villafranca, Torino. It was there, through the handling of clothing belonging to individuals living under false identities, that she encountered information she was never meant to see. The presence of a notebook or documents containing names and connections linked to a wider network transformed an ordinary work task into the point of intersection between her life and the hidden world of Cosa Nostra. The reaction to this accidental discovery was shaped entirely by the structure and mentality of that world. Within the operational logic of the mafia, the possibility of exposure is treated not as a risk to be monitored, but as a threat to be eliminated. In that framework, Graziella's lack of intent was irrelevant. What mattered was only the fact that she had seen something. This principle, applied without consideration for innocence or intent, ultimately determined her fate. The violence that followed on December 12, 1985, was not an isolated act of brutality, but a calculated decision made within that logic. She was abducted shortly after leaving her workplace, taken to a remote area near Forte Camp 1, and killed using a lupara, a hunting shotgun commonly associated with mafia executions. The presence of multiple gunshot wounds and signs of resistance indicated that the event unfolded quickly and violently, leaving no possibility for escape or intervention. Yet the physical details of the crime represent only one layer of its meaning. The broader significance lies in the fact that a 17-year-old girl, whose daily life consisted of work, family responsibility, and routine movement between home and employment, was drawn into a system of violence solely because of unintended knowledge. In the years that followed, as the investigation developed and eventually led to the conviction of Gerlando Alberti Jr. and Giovanni Sutera, the case became increasingly recognized as part of a larger pattern of mafia violence in Sicily. It highlighted how organized crime operated not only through direct confrontation with law enforcement or rival groups, but also through silent enforcement mechanisms directed at civilians who inadvertently came into contact with sensitive information. Graziella Campagna's story thus became emblematic of a category of victims who were not participants in any conflict, but who nonetheless became casualties of a system designed to protect itself through fear and elimination. The legal recognition of her murder as an act carried out by individuals connected to Cosa Nostra provided a formal acknowledgement of this reality. But it did not alter the fundamental imbalance that allowed such events to occur in the first place. Beyond the courtroom, her name began to take on a different role in public memory. Graziella Campagna came to be remembered as a vittima innocent di mafia, an innocent victim of organized crime, a designation that reflects not only the circumstances of her death, but also the broader societal effort in Italy to confront and name the impact of mafia violence on ordinary people. Her case has been referenced in educational contexts, civic discussions, and anti-mafia initiatives, serving as a reminder that the consequences of organized crime extend far beyond those directly involved in its structures. The impact of her death also lies in its simplicity. There are no elements of sensationalism in her life story itself, no prior involvement in criminal activity, no complex entanglements, no personal trajectory that would typically be associated with violent endings in true crime narratives. Instead, what defines her case is the abrupt and irreversible intrusion of a hidden system into an ordinary life. That intrusion transformed a routine workday into the final chapter of her existence. In reflecting on this case, what remains most significant is not only the identification and conviction of those responsible, but the recognition of how vulnerability can exist in spaces that appear completely removed from danger. Graziella's life did not intersect with organized crime through choice or intent, but through proximity and circumstance. Her death serves as a reminder of the human cost of systems that operate beyond visibility, where the boundaries between ordinary life and hidden power structures can collapse without warning. The final reflection of this case is therefore not only about justice achieved after many years, but about the fragility of everyday safety when confronted with forces that prioritize silence over life. Even after the court proceedings formally concluded and the sentences against Gerlando Alberti Jr. and Giovanni Sutera were confirmed as life imprisonment, the case of Graziella Campagna did not truly end in the way that legal files tend to suggest. In judicial terms, there's a clear boundary between unresolved and resolved, between accusation and conviction, between uncertainty and final judgment. But in reality, especially in cases tied to organized crime and long-term investigative delays, that boundary does not erase the emotional, social, and historical weight of what happened. Graziella Campagna's case continued to exist in public consciousness long after the final ruling, not because it contained unanswered legal questions, but because it represented something much larger than a single criminal act. It represented the vulnerability of ordinary life in a system where secrecy and silence could operate alongside everyday normality without immediate detection. Her name became part of a broader cultural and civic understanding in Italy of what it means to be an innocent victim of the mafia, a phrase that in her case is not symbolic or abstract, but literal in its meaning. She was not involved in criminal networks, not associated with investigative activity, and not engaged in any conflict. Her connection to the world of Cosa Nostra was accidental, created entirely through the routine execution of her job in a laundry shop, where she handled clothing belonging to individuals living under false identities. The small notebook or documents she discovered in one of those garments became the critical point of contact between her life and a hidden structure of organized crime, a structure that operated with its own internal logic of protection, concealment, and elimination of perceived risk. That single moment of unintended discovery is what transformed her from a civilian worker into a target. The consequences that followed were not immediate in public understanding, because the early investigation did not initially recognize the full scope of what had occurred. The delay in identifying the connection to mafia figures, combined with early investigative uncertainty, meant that Graziella's disappearance was not immediately framed within the correct context of organized crime violence. Instead, the truth emerged gradually, shaped by fragmented information, persistent family involvement, and the slow dismantling of false identities that had allowed Gerlando Alberti Jr. and Giovanni Sutera to operate within the same geographic space without early detection. Over time, as the judicial process unfolded and the evidence was consolidated, the interpretation of the case became more stable. This was not a spontaneous or random act of violence, but a targeted elimination carried out because Graziella had unintentionally acquired knowledge that could compromise individuals connected to Cosa Nostra. The legal system ultimately affirmed this interpretation through conviction and sentencing. But the broader significance of the case extends beyond that conclusion. One of the most important aspects of the aftermath is the way in which Graziella Campagna's name has been preserved in civic memory. She is not remembered as part of a criminal investigation in progress, nor as a figure connected to any form of controversy or ambiguity regarding her role in the events. Instead, she is remembered as a symbol of innocence disrupted by structural violence. In Italy, cases like hers have contributed to a wider social recognition of how organized crime affects not only those directly involved in its networks, but also individuals who come into contact with it unintentionally through everyday life. Her story is often referenced in educational and anti-mafia contexts precisely because it demonstrates how proximity, even accidental and unknowable in advance, can carry consequences in environments where secrecy is enforced through extreme measures. The fact that Graziella was only 17 years old at the time of her death adds another layer to how the case is understood. Her age underscores the imbalance between her position in society and the forces that ultimately determined her fate. She was at the beginning of her adult life, engaged in routine work to support her family, with no indication of involvement in any sphere that would typically intersect with organized crime investigations. The contrast between her everyday reality and the hidden world that intersected with it is central to the enduring emotional impact of the case. Another lasting dimension of the case lies in the role of her family, particularly her brother, whose involvement as a member of the Carabinieri contributed to the pursuit of information during periods when the investigation itself faced delays and limitations. This aspect of the case reflects a recurring theme in long and complex criminal investigations: the persistence of private individuals in seeking clarity when institutional processes move slowly or encounter obstacles. While the final outcome was determined through formal judicial mechanisms, the path toward that outcome was not linear, and the accumulation of information over time depended on both official and personal efforts to reconstruct what had happened. In reflecting on the case as a whole, what remains most significant is not only the identification of the perpetrators or the confirmation of their sentences, but the structural reality that allowed the crime to occur in the first place. A young worker performing routine duties in a small-town laundry encountered information she could not have reasonably understood as dangerous in its full context. Yet that information was sufficient within the internal logic of organized crime to justify lethal action. This imbalance between intention and consequence is one of the defining characteristics of the case. It demonstrates how systems built on secrecy can extend their influence into spaces that appear entirely ordinary, and how the threshold for perceived threat within those systems can be far removed from conventional notions of harm or intent. The legacy of Graziella Campagna's case therefore exists on multiple levels. In legal terms, it reached closure through conviction and sentencing. In social terms, it became part of Italy's broader recognition of the human cost of mafia presence in civilian life. And in human terms, it remains a reminder of how quickly an ordinary life can be altered by contact with forces that operate outside visible structures of accountability. Her story endures not because of complexity, but because of its stark simplicity. A young woman doing her job, a hidden reality intersecting with that job without warning, and a consequence that far exceeded anything she could have anticipated or understood in the moment it began. In the broader reflection on the case of Graziella Campagna, what becomes increasingly evident is that the legal resolution of the crime, while necessary and significant, does not fully encompass the layers of meaning that the case has accumulated over time. Even after the convictions of Gerlando Alberti Jr. and Giovanni Sutera were finalized and the judicial process reached its conclusion, the story continued to exist in a different form, one that is not governed by procedural timelines or evidentiary thresholds, but by memory, interpretation, and the ongoing societal effort to understand how such a crime could emerge from within an ordinary environment. Graziella's case occupies a particular space within the broader history of organized crime in Sicily, because it does not rely on complexity of motive or intricate criminal plotting in the way that some other cases do. Instead, its impact comes from its simplicity and its proximity to everyday life. A young woman working in a laundry shop performing routine tasks encounter information that she was never meant to see, and that accidental exposure alone became sufficient to alter the course of her life permanently. This structural simplicity is precisely what gives the case its enduring weight, because it removes any distance between the viewer and the event itself. There is no specialized context required to understand the vulnerability at the center of the story. It exists within a framework of ordinary work, ordinary movement, and ordinary assumptions about safety in familiar spaces. Over time, as the case became part of Italy's collective awareness of mafia-related violence, it began to serve a function beyond its immediate legal outcome. It became an example used to illustrate how organized crime does not always operate exclusively within the boundaries of criminal environments, but can extend its influence into civilian spaces in ways that are not immediately visible. In Graziella's case, the laundry shop represents precisely such a space, a place defined by routine, repetition, and trust in the normal flow of everyday interactions. Nothing in that environment would have indicated to her that she was in proximity to individuals, operating under false identities linked to Cosa Nostra. The men known to her as Ingegnera Canada and Giamitra Lombardo were able to exist within that same environment without immediate exposure, reinforcing the idea that organized crime in this context did not always present itself through overt displays of power, but through concealment within ordinary social structures. The discovery of the notebook or documents inside the garment was therefore not the result of investigative intent or deliberate inquiry, but of procedural work. It was a byproduct of labor, a routine action embedded in her professional responsibilities. Yet within the internal logic of the criminal structure she inadvertently encountered, that routine action was interpreted in a completely different way. The absence of intent on her part did not mitigate the perceived risk from the perspective of those seeking to protect their identities and operations. This disconnect between intention and consequence is one of the defining elements of the case, and it highlights a fundamental asymmetry that exists in situations where secrecy is enforced through extreme measures. Graziella's lack of awareness did not function as protection. Instead, it placed her in a position where she could not even recognize the significance of what she had seen, while others interpreted that same moment as a critical breach of security. In the aftermath of her death and the eventual identification of those responsible, the case also illustrates the prolonged nature of justice in environments where organized crime has historically exerted influence. The passage of more than 2 decades between the crime and the final confirmation of life sentences underscores the challenges inherent in pursuing accountability under such conditions. Investigations were not only dealing with the passage of time and the degradation of immediate evidence, but also with the structural difficulties of identifying individuals operating under false identities and within networks that depend on silence and fragmentation of information. The involvement of Graziella's family, particularly her brother's role as a member of the Carabinieri, adds another dimension to this process, reflecting how personal commitment often intersects with institutional investigation in cases where formal mechanisms alone are insufficient to produce timely clarity. His efforts to reconstruct the circumstances of her disappearance contributed to the gradual dismantling of ambiguity surrounding the case, helping to shift it from a category of uncertainty into one of defined criminal responsibility. However, even with the legal outcome established, the broader implications of the case extend into how society interprets vulnerability itself. Graziella Campagna has come to be recognized as a symbol of innocent victimhood within the context of mafia violence, a designation that emphasizes not only her lack of involvement in any criminal activity, but also the arbitrary nature of the circumstances that led to her death. The fact that her life intersected fatally with organized crime not through choice or association, but through occupational routine, underscores a critical reality. That exposure to hidden systems of power can occur without warning and without any conscious engagement from those affected. This recognition has contributed to the way her name is preserved in civic memory, particularly within educational and anti-mafia contexts in Italy, where her story is used to illustrate the human cost of criminal structures that operate beyond visible social boundaries. At the same time, the case raises broader questions about the relationship between visibility and safety. Graziella's experience demonstrates that danger is not always located in spaces that are immediately recognizable as dangerous. Instead, it can emerge within environments that are socially and structurally normalized, where the assumption of safety is based on routine rather than awareness of underlying conditions. The laundry shop, the bus stop, the path home, these are not spaces typically associated with risk. Yet in this case, they became the setting for a sequence of events that led to irreversible loss. This contrast between perception and reality is central to understanding the emotional and conceptual weight of the case. In reflecting on the entirety of the case, from the initial disappearance through the prolonged investigation and eventual convictions, what remains most significant is not only the identification of those responsible, but the recognition of how fragile the boundary can be between ordinary life and hidden systems of power. Graziella Campagna's story does not rely on extraordinary circumstances to achieve its impact. Rather, it derives its meaning from the absence of anything extraordinary in her life prior to the moment of her exposure. She was a young worker fulfilling her responsibilities within the limits of her environment. And it is precisely within those limits that she encountered a reality that should have remained inaccessible to her. The lasting legacy of the case, therefore, exists not only in the legal record, but in the continued effort to understand how such intersections can occur, and what they reveal about the broader social and structural conditions in which they take place. In the continued reflection on the case of Graziella Campagna, what emerges even after extensive judicial closure and years of public recognition is the enduring presence of her story within Italy's collective understanding of organized crime and its impact on ordinary life. Over time, the legal facts of the case became stable and undisputed. Graziella Campagna, a 17-year-old laundry worker from Saponara, was killed on December 12, 1985, after unknowingly encountering information linked to individuals operating under false identities connected to Cosa Nostra. Gerlando Alberti Jr. and Giovanni Sutera were ultimately convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment for their roles in her death. Yet, while the judicial narrative reached completion, the broader societal interpretation of the case continued to evolve, shaped not by new evidence, but by the way her story is remembered, retold, and contextualized within Italy's ongoing confrontation with mafia influence. One of the most significant aspects of this long-term legacy is how Graziella Campagna's name has, become integrated into educational and civic frameworks aimed at anti-mafia awareness. She is consistently referred to as a vittima innocent di mafia, an innocent victim of organized crime, a classification that is not merely symbolic but descriptive of her exact position within the events that led to her death. Unlike individuals who may become entangled in criminal environments through association or proximity, Graziella's connection to the world of Cosa Nostra was entirely accidental and indirect. She did not seek out information, nor did she engage in any investigative or confrontational behavior. Her exposure occurred through the normal execution of her professional duties in a laundry shop, where she handled clothing belonging to individuals who were concealing their identities behind fabricated professional roles. This distinction is central to how her case is understood in retrospective analysis. It underscores a key characteristic of organized crime systems: their ability to operate invisibly within civilian environments, and the way in which even unintentional contact with hidden structures can produce severe consequences. In Graziella's case, the discovery of a notebook or documents inside a garment was not an act of inquiry, but a routine part of her work. Yet within the internal logic of the criminal network she unknowingly encountered, that moment was interpreted as exposure, and exposure was treated as unacceptable risk. This asymmetry between intent and consequence remains one of the most defining features of the case. Another enduring element of her legacy is the role her story plays in illustrating the limitations and challenges of early investigative processes in cases involving organized crime. The initial phase of the investigation was marked by uncertainty and misdirection, with early assumptions failing to immediately recognize the involvement of mafia-linked individuals operating under false identities. This delay in identification is not simply a procedural detail, but part of a broader pattern observed in similar cases, where concealment strategies and social integration by organized crime figures complicate early detection. The fact that Gerlando Alberti Jr. and Giovanni Sutera were able to operate under assumed identities within the same geographic area where Graziella lived and worked highlights the structural difficulty of distinguishing between legitimate civilian presence and concealed criminal activity in such environments. Over time, as the investigation progressed and familial involvement, particularly through Graziella's brother, a member of the Carabinieri, helped reinforce investigative direction, the case gradually transitioned from ambiguity to clarity. This transition, however, was not immediate, and the extended duration between the crime and final conviction reflects the broader temporal realities of prosecuting organized crime cases in Italy during that period. The judicial outcome, resulting in life imprisonment for both perpetrators, provided formal closure in legal terms, but it did not diminish the broader significance of the case as a social and cultural reference point. Instead, it reinforced the narrative that justice, while ultimately achievable, may require extended periods of persistence, institutional effort, and personal commitment from those closest to the victim. In contemporary remembrance, Graziella Campagna's name is preserved not through the details of criminal procedure, but through her identity as an ordinary young woman whose life was interrupted by forces entirely external to her understanding or control. Her story is often used to illustrate the broader human impact of organized crime beyond its internal structures, emphasizing that its consequences extend into civilian spaces and affect individuals who have no connection to its operations. This framing is particularly important in educational contexts, where her case serves as a concrete example of how abstract concepts such as secrecy, power, and enforcement can manifest in real-world outcomes affecting individuals engaged in everyday work. Ultimately, the enduring relevance of Graziella Campagna's case lies not in unresolved mystery, but in the clarity of its core elements, a young worker, an ordinary environment, an unintended discovery, and a disproportionate response shaped by the logic of concealment and control. The case remains a point of reflection on how systems of hidden power interact with visible society, and how the boundaries between them can collapse in ways that are neither predictable nor preventable for those outside those systems. In this sense, her story continues to function as both a historical record and a cautionary example of how fragility can exist within the most routine aspects of daily life, and how that fragility can be exploited by structures that depend on silence to survive.